Alrighty. Hey, everyone. Thank you so much for tuning in. And look, I'm super excited to get to chat with a new friend today, Aaron Costello. Hey, one of the researchers doing SaaS security over at App Omni. And I'm very excited because this is a whole new world for me. I don't know much of SaaS security because I'm normally just coming from the endpoint world. But I think, hey, it's a whole new different ballgame. And Aaron, it's great to see you, my friend. I hope things are well, but I'd love to learn what you're up to these days. And I don't know what you got in the works for us here.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much for having me on. I'm really excited to introduce you to this exciting new space of SaaS security. And I think in the interest of starting at the beginning of the story, right, we can start talking about maybe the typical security challenges that SaaS applications are facing today, right? And how these challenges came about. So I think the first thing that's the most important to understand is how it got to a point in which SaaS applications don't really have internal processes for being secured by organizations in the typical way that a web application built internally would. And there's several pieces to that story. The first piece is if we're looking at a SaaS application, whose responsibility is it initially to even go about securing this data? So you've got platform administrators, so your typical system admins who maintain the critical functionality of these SaaS applications, whether it's ticketing, HR, payroll, whatever it might be, or is it the security teams who typically do your internal penetration tests against these maybe custom web apps you use internally or mobile applications being used? Do you pull developers into that? Who's auditing the on-platform code, right? And so there can often be friction there as to whose responsibility it is. The platform administrators certainly may not have the time to actually tackle the security aspect of things. The security teams then, on the other hand, may not have the time to ramp up and understand the ramifications of certain controls across 100 plus different SaaS applications, right? That's massive scale. So that's the main thing I wanted to bring up, because process is really everything when it comes to being a large organization. Having a process to secure these applications and remediate issues, that's lacking massively.
Yeah, I figure, it's built by a whole nother provider, right? So it's a weird sort of shared responsibility model, and you don't really know who goes what and where and how.
Absolutely, yeah. And that's another massive important aspect is the shared responsibility model. And I feel like that gets often misunderstood. And the key things to really understand here is which party is responsible for securing what, okay? So with respect to my security research, I just put into two buckets. We've got the vulnerabilities in the SaaS products themselves, right? A SQL injection on Salesforce or remote code execution on ServiceNow. And well, these issues are affecting every single instance that's live. It's an issue in the actual core code. And that's the vendor's responsibility to fix. So gets reported, they do their patching, gets pushed to all customer instances, and everyone's happy and safe again for the time being. And then we look at the misconfiguration side of things. And this is the responsibility of the actual customer, the individuals who purchase the SaaS application. And these misconfigurations are things such as creating a custom API endpoint that has powerful functionality, which you may have accidentally exposed to the public, these kind of things. And so it makes a lot of sense when you think through it, because if I'm a customer and I decide, I'm going to modify my access controls, I'm going to grant every external user the ability to read these credentials. Okay, you can't really then go and complain to the vendor and say, hey, what's going on here? Because they'll turn around and just reply with, well, you made the change, right? You custom exactly, right? And that's something that's widely misunderstood. And I hope that does clarify a little bit as to who's responsible for what.
Yeah, it's funny. I feel like, again, I tend to hear, I know a lot of, marketing phrase and words and just the way that we try to add terms and vernacular for a lot of stuff in the industry. But SaaS security always kind of felt funny because I hear IaaS along with SaaS, like infrastructure as a service or platform as a service. But I felt like SaaS specifically is usually one that's almost neglected. It's not often, I think, talked about in the security sense, just, nice doodads and things to add to a business. Not really, a potential attack surface, right?
Yeah, 100%. And who's to really blame for that? Because if you look at the past couple of years, okay, you had the pandemic. And so you had this massive shift from on-prem to these SaaS products. Businesses are fumbling as to how they configure them, how they ensure that their business runs smoothly online, all of these things, and didn't necessarily have the time to ramp up Now, naturally, that's only going to be a subset of businesses who kind of went through that period where they're forced to make that shift. And these applications, these SaaS applications, a lot of the big players, ServiceNow, Salesforce, Oracle, NetSuite, they're not new, right? They're 10 plus years old. But I think with the recent and the relatively recent attacks like Midnight Blizzard, targeting SaaS applications, it's certainly highlighting the importance of SaaS security in this space.
Now, I know you focus a lot, I think, specifically in either the ServiceNow or Salesforce. I think I've seen some NetSuite from you more and more and more. I know your day job over at AppOmni certainly keeps you, in the mix with all that. Is there anything that you'd, be willing to showcase? Do you have anything up your sleeve for some show and tell, or anything else we should kind of banter and think on beforehand?
Yeah, absolutely. I have a little something here to show you, and this is actually relatively relevant to what I was talking about. So I touched a little bit on there, these apt groups, these groups targeting SaaS as of recent. And when you kind of look at the playbook, it's relatively the same. Okay. The assumption based on that is these groups typically know what they're after, right? They're not really spending a massive amount of time upskilling on these platforms. Because when you look at things such as persistence, right? If we're looking at that mitre kill chain, if we're looking at things such as persistence, is just dropping in an OAuth application onto the SaaS product and hoping, hey, I hope no one deletes this so I can just keep this backdoor here. Is that really like the best that can be done? And so what I'm going to show you is just a brief example of how powerful these SaaS applications are. And it's kind of scary. You'll see the capabilities that if attackers if they upskill and they get wiser as to what can be done on these platforms, just what kind of things they could do to maintain persistence, as an example. Sweet. So I'll just share my screen with you here. If we're talking about persistence specifically, we've only got so much time, right? This is exactly what I was talking about with respect to the average persistence, right? We're going to use ServiceNow as an example SaaS application, right? That's the target. That's the victim in this sense, a customer with a ServiceNow instance. But this is really interchangeable with Salesforce and NetSuite. It might differ ever so slightly as to the kind of things you can do, but it is largely for the big players fairly interchangeable, right? So this is the typical playbook that we see. An OAuth application is created, so they've escalated their permissions. So they've compromised, escalated permissions, exfiltrated their data, and then they want to maintain some access. And so from that compromised privileged session, they'll create an OAuth application and create a privileged user for that connection. And from that point, they can routinely generate access tokens using that new OAuth client that they created and query data over time and steal more data over time or create data potentially. And I mean, this, as you can see from this arm, it's very, very simplistic and it's probably relatively easy to spot, especially considering that these supply chain attacks are really coming to fruition. They're being highlighted a lot, right? So organizations are a lot wiser as to third-party application access. And so just dropping in a fresh new OAuth client is really not going to fly in the future anyway, right? So I want to take you over here, right? Ooh. And don't be intimidated by this. This is still quite a basic playbook as to how an actor may maintain persistence. And I will just add a note here to say that this is not necessarily what I would do. I have slightly hamstrung this process because I don't want this information to necessarily be misused in any way. So if you are a malicious actor watching, if you are a malicious apt group watching, I will say that this will get you caught, right, if followed step by step. But it's just to showcase the complexity of SaaS applications and how powerful they are, right? So we're starting off at the same point where we have this compromised privilege session, maybe from a session of hijacking or something similar, and we'll create a privileged user, okay? Now, this is interchangeable with an OAuth application that uses client credentials, one that can operate on its own without a user. It's interchangeable, so when I refer to user here, could also be one of those OAuth applications. So they create a privileged user, right? And that's all well and good. Create a user, grant a privileged access. The current privileged session you have is not going to last too long, right? So we need to have that backdoor user in this scenario. Here's where it gets a lot more interesting. Okay. So in a lot of the major SaaS applications, you have the ability to create these hooks. Okay. So these hooks can be created to alter the behavior of operations, database operations on the SaaS application. And so why is that important? And how can we leverage as an actor, right? Because that's the shoes that we're in right now. How can we leverage this legitimate functionality, which is used by businesses to maintain access? And so here's an example of what we'll do. So the first thing is hiding the user that we just created. So what I'll do is swap over to ServiceNow. And this is just a demo developer instance. These are not real individuals. And this is not real information that I'm showing you. But what we will do is we will, using our compromised privilege session, we will create a hook, right? So the first thing we'll actually do is create a new user, and this will be our backdoor user. So I don't recommend reusing this user ID during a pen test necessarily. However, for the sake of the proof of concept, I think it'll do just fine. So I've saved this user, right? And we can assign, I just assume we assign the admin role to it or a privileged role. And so this user is created. Okay, so this is a problem if you're trying to stay hidden because you were sitting there at the top, all right? So how can we leverage these hooks to hide that? So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to take the ID of this user. I'll show you what we'll do with this. So we will create one of these hooks. And as I said, this is overly simplistic. I don't recommend reusing this. It can be modified to handle a lot more complex cases, but for the sake of demonstration, it'll just be a basic hook. So let's call this hook and we will set it so that it hooks into calls made to the user table, which is just the database table that stores all user information. Okay. So what we'll do here is we'll look at this when to run tab. So when should this hook run? Well, we're going to be modifying queries made to that table, right? So that ideally when the page loads, when an admin or security team loads that user page that we just looked at, our user won't appear. So we're going to say that the hook runs before. Okay. So before the query gets submitted to the database, this is when the hook will run. We'll go to the advanced tab. So I will need you to bear with me because this is JavaScript, right? It's server-side JavaScript. So avert your eyes for anyone that had a bad experience. And what we'll do here is we'll modify the current query, which is represented by current variable here. We will modify this to hide our user. So we'll take the user ID and we'll say, modify the query to basically, if you were to translate this to SQL, this would be equivalent to where user ID does not equal the ID of our malicious user. Okay. And we'll save that.
But that's it, huh?
That's it. No,
that's the gist.
As I said, this is very, very basic, right? And I can't guarantee,
awesome.
Like, if you were to even test this, it might even break some login functionality because the system itself will be querying this table. However, there's things that you can do, right? There's things such as like, for example, you can check what's like who exactly is requesting. So I think it's the GS, right? So you can actually check who's requesting this data, and you can say, okay, well, if it's an interactive session, then block the query because it's someone looking at the table. However, if it's a script or if it's a non-interactive session like an API, you can show the user, right? So what we'll do is it's really awesome, and that's one of the reasons I actually love ServiceNow because the platform is so powerful. Like you can really do anything on this, right? So we've saved that and I'll just hop on over to the user table and we'll leave those changes for the moment. Okay, let's order this by created descending and our user is gone. Okay. Our user is completely gone and cannot be seen from the UI. Okay. What's even crazier is typically if you were to filter these rows as an admin, let's say you're looking for something. Okay. Like, oh, we're going to only search for like active users, right? You can add your own custom filters, but the hook that I just applied will always add that filter to block the user from appearing. So you would never know that this is going on necessarily. Okay. Now here's another issue. Well, we now have a business rule called hook.
Right.
Okay. We now have a business rule called hook, and this in itself is not great. Okay.
Yeah, that's sketchy on its own, right?
This is right. 100%. That's sketchy. But we could use a hook to hide our hook.
Nice.
Okay. I'm not going to demonstrate that because I think it'll get a little too out of hand with what people could start doing with this, right? But you could use a hook to hide the hook. Not only that, I'm going to show another very, very interesting neat trick. So what we'll do is we'll add some fields to the view, right? So these are just fields that are on this table, and you can make them appear in the UI if some of them are interesting to you. And we'll look at who created this hook, right? So that's your compromised session. That's me. And if you are this user, or if you're an admin and you're looking at this and you're thinking, well, this guy, like, why has he created this? Okay, that's suspicious in and of itself. Like, he never creates these business rules, these hooks. We can change that, okay? And what we'll do is we're going to export this record if ServiceNow allows me to. So I'll open this record up, and what I will do is I will export the XML of this record, okay? Now, you won't be able to see what I'm doing right now because I'm in a text editor, but what I'm seeing is is an XML representation of the record. And so the values that are within each field. And I'm just going to change some of these values. And so what we will do is change who created this. So we're going to change who created this. And you'll see what I've changed it to in about 20 seconds, and I'll tell you why. And I also don't like that this appeared at the top of the results. So we're also going to change the date that this was created. Okay, so we'll save that, and see, looks good. And what I'll do is I will
re-import the new totally modified and tampered with XML, right?
Absolutely.
That is so
Absolutely.
cool. Why are we able to do this?
So we'll import this. So it's just disappeared.
Nice.
Why is it disappeared? Because I didn't use a hook to hide the hook, right? That's not what I did. Let's see if we can find this. There we go. So what we've done is we have modified who created it. We've modified the last date it was updated. And we've also modified when it was created too. So now this looks a lot less suspicious. Okay. Firstly, we went back in time. Okay. Yeah. So now it doesn't look like a new artifact. Now it looks old. And people are afraid to touch old things. Okay. They're afraid to break stuff. And I changed who created it to system. Now, in this scenario, this is the only one created by system. So maybe not the best option. Maybe admin is slightly better. But the reason I did this is because in ServiceNow, typically when the vendor releases additional scripts, right, over the releases, like, oh, we created a new out-of-the-box script that lets you do this. It'll be pushed to your instance as a customer, and it'll be created by system, the system user. And so if you look at this and you see created by system, you'll be thinking, oh, well, I better not necessarily mess with this because this looks like it was created by the product itself or by the vendor. So I don't really want to touch this. So this is very basic. Ideally, what we would do is modify the created date, the updated date. Could modify the created by, but really I would just create a hook to hide the hook, okay? And the hook can hide itself too. So create a second hook to hide this hook and itself. And now no one's the wiser, right? So that's just a basic example. So that's step 2. And then step 3, so this is interesting and this has multiple applications, right? As to why we're doing this. Create/modify a scheduled system script. All right. So this is very, very common amongst the big players because of, I alluded to earlier, the kind of no code, low code, but we'll be running for the purposes of reproduction. We'll be looking at a script because scripts are far more customizable. And so I'll just show you what this looks like. So if we look for scheduled jobs, in the interests of persistence, what do we do? So I'll leave the run as blank in the hope that it'll execute as a system user. What we could do is create a scheduled script that runs, let's say, every couple hours that will execute some code. That code, we could say, ensure that our backdoor user still exists. If not, create it. Okay. Ensure it's still an admin role. Ensure it's still active. If not, assign the roles, unlock the account. Oh, our persistence, our hooks, they got deleted. Okay, we'll just recreate them. Write the code to just recreate them and insert the values into the database. So this in itself will ensure that those artifacts that you've dropped there to maintain access will stay there. Okay. Here's a second reason as to why this might be useful. So we spoke about maintaining those hooks that we created. Okay, make sure that they still exist. If not, create them, maintain the user, create the user if it doesn't exist, if it was removed. Here's a little something extra, right, I'm going to give you. So typically what we see in large enterprises, they've got internal processes for testing. And that's largely to do with testing the code components that they're deploying to ServiceNow before they go into production, right? And that makes a lot of sense, right? If you're talking about GitHub, you're not just going to push this code you've written to the master branch, right? So what they'll do is they will have, let's say, even just one other instance, a developer instance or a test instance, where they will develop the new functionality. These are the customers, right? The customers, developers, develop the new functionality, do the testing, and if it's good, they'll push to prod. Okay, over like a typical release window. What happens then is the next time they want to make some changes, well, they're going to clone production back to their developer instance. Okay. Now, what's included in a clone? If we were to clone a snapshot of ServiceNow production and import it into the developer instance, what gets included in that? And on ServiceNow, you can actually see this yourself. However, I can tell you what's not included. Okay, users are not included because you don't want your production user data being in testing. OAuth applications are not included either by default. But what is included is development artifacts. So now the scheduled job, right, that we just mimicked creating is in your developer instance. and it's going to run. And what's it going to do when it runs? Well, it's going to do this whole thing again.
Oh, wow.
Except for it's on your dev instance. And why would you want to be on the dev instance? Okay, well, two reasons. Number one, your dev instance is likely integrated with GitHub. So there's a chance you might be able to steal like a personal access token, and then you've access to a GitHub repository. Number two, let's say you get caught. Let's say all of these things get deleted. All of this is deleted, but they deleted it after the clone window. Well, when development pushes its artifacts back to production, oh, look, the scheduled job reappears. The hooks get built again. The user gets created again. So you're back to square one, right? And, and this is just something that I whipped up, and it's very, very basic, but it just highlights the complexity and the power. And naturally, we're assuming this is privileged access, like a development admin or system admin. But we have seen historically that threat actors have had a good amount of success with escalating their privileges, right? So it's not too bold of a claim to say that this would happen. And so that's just a little tidbit as to what could happen if these threat actors become a little wiser, and that's just the persistence. If you can imagine everything else, all the other steps of the kill chain, it's going to get scary. Okay. One other thing I wanted to talk about is my own research. Okay. Nice. Because the stuff that I showed you, we're having fun, we're playing around with it, but it's not typically the kind of thing that I do day to day with respect to research. If you are familiar with any of my previous research, it's mostly highlighting data exposure issues, right? So most recently, we released a blog post, which was in coordination with ServiceNow and their security team, in which we highlighted how thousands of organizations had misconfigured access controls to their knowledge bases. So knowledge bases can be used for internal and external purposes. They could detail technical information such as how internal users should access certain systems. They could contain architecture diagrams for other systems, payroll process, all that kind of stuff. And this highlighted, hey, there's a ton of intended to be internal data that's being exposed to the public, and it's not obvious, right? It's not like it's published on a page on /KB, okay? And so this research highlighted that, and it included a proof of concept where I displayed, okay, here's an API that can be used. This is a legacy API. It is undocumented. You can provide it with a KB number, which is brute forceable, incrementable, okay? And it'll see if it's accessible. And if it is, it'll just return all the data in your KB. And when I tell you, people don't take this stuff as seriously as they should, because I found Fortune 100 customers through responsible disclosure. So these organizations that had vulnerability disclosure policies, I said, oh, look, they're using ServiceNow. We're talking Fortune 100 customers that had access tokens to production systems. And in one certain instance, I had 30 live access tokens to various other systems, and they're all SaaS. Okay. So the information can get very sensitive, right? Very, very sensitive. And one of the things I wanted to touch on with respect to that research itself was it was a big milestone, not with respect to just the finding, right? It's a cool finding, but also in terms of the process, the collaboration process with SaaS security vendors. Right? We coordinated a disclosure with ServiceNow. So we submitted the issue to them, provided them with an ample time window to consider how they may tackle this issue, because this is a misconfiguration that customers are making. So our question was, hey, customers are making these access control misconfigurations, but it is very, very widespread. We just thought you should know. Okay, this is what we're seeing. And what they decided to do was step in. And that's huge. A vendor stepping over that line in the shared responsibility model and saying, okay, we need to put our customer security first. And we're going to make some changes. We're going to give you a heads up about these changes before they go out, right? But things might break. Certain people may not have access to knowledge base articles that they had before. But in the interest of your security, we're making these changes. So it's huge, right? It may not seem it, but for someone who's been in the SaaS security space for nearly 4 years, it is a big deal. And I'm really looking forward to the future in which there is that increased collaboration between security researchers and these SaaS vendors with respect to these kinds of findings,
That's awesome. Yeah. I mean, I feel like at the end of the day, it's that partnership, it's that teamwork, it's collaboration, just as you said. Hey, all trying to get us better together. Is that work and is that research you had done through day job, through App Omni? Is there more you tend to be, I don't know, fighting fires for or digging into over there?
Well, so one thing actually I failed to mention was as part of that process with disclosing to ServiceNow, once they reached out to their customers and said, hey, giving you a heads up, there's been this finding, we then coordinated with our customers and said, hey, Aaron from App Omni Labs found this interesting, potentially widespread misconfiguration. And then I built automated scanning functionality into the product, right?
Nice.
To detect this for our customers. And we've got an absolute ton of these automated security scans, right? That look for these nuances. So it's really like having a SaaS security expert, an automated SaaS security expert. So platform admins, when they're leveraging App Omni for SaaS security, they don't necessarily have to know the nuances of, oh, how could a threat actor take advantage of this permission, or how do I resolve
and
this?
business rules and
Hooks and
everything that you
business
just
rules.
showcased. Yeah, it's like, okay, now
Absolutely.
we track that now.
We provide them the finding and we tell them how to remediate it. Okay. So you don't have, like, over time, you may just become a SaaS security expert from leveraging the platform in itself, right? And that's only one part of the story at App Omni, because we have those kind of nuanced scans that are very product specific, right? Because we'll have different research for different products like Salesforce, ServiceNow, but there is a ton of other functionality and a ton of other things that go into really holistically securing your SaaS. So we've got threat detection is one, right? And that's massive, right? Personally, I'm a security researcher, so I always like to, stay ahead of that a little bit. I hope it doesn't get to that point. I don't like seeing alerts on customer instances, okay? But there is that aspect of it. Ingesting customers' logs and then normalizing that data, analyzing it in an automated fashion, and alerting as to potentially suspicious behaviors, right? And things like that. And then depending on how the customer wants to receive those logs, we can send them straight to the SIM. So making the kind of SOC team's life a lot easier. We've got the third-party application piece. So with the whole increase in supply chain attacks and how they're being leveraged, massively important to have that functionality baked into the product. And so what we do is we're not only looking at, okay, well, how have you configured certain SaaS like OAuth clients sitting on your SaaS applications? What privileges and scopes do they have? We're also looking at, okay, you've got X user leveraging Y SaaS application. Okay. This SaaS application is associated with a known breach, right? Like the Travis CI breach. So we're alerting them as to, hey, this was used in an attack. You should deprovision this third-party application, right? So a lot of cool stuff. You got other things such as mapping security controls. So we ingest their security controls, mapping that to compliance frameworks like NIST, that kind of stuff. Much less exciting for us kind of hacker people, right? All that process.
Still very necessary still. But.
Right. Very, very necessary, right? And things such as providing them with completely customizable and configurable policies that effectively give you 200 recommendations for your ServiceNow security properties that are used to dictate authorization, access control, tons of different stuff. And we say, hey, we noticed you have MFA off. We're alerting you to that. Turn it on, right? So there's a ton of components, a ton of features within the product. And the great thing about it is it's a centralized view of all of this stuff. I'm sure when you saw me going through ServiceNow there and I'm searching for certain things, you've got tons of these different results. And it's like, oh my God, like where do I even begin to tackle this stuff? Whereas with App Omni, it's a holistic eagle-eye view of your SaaS estate from a security perspective, right?
That is awesome. And hey, this has been a very, very cool showcase. Again, I never even get to see ServiceNow, so just seeing a couple of the tricks there were awesome. And I love to hear all the success of App Omni and the incredible stuff that they're up to. But hey, may I ask, I don't know, what's the call to action? How can folks learn a little bit more about you, see your research? How can folks, kick the tires with App Omni? I don't know, just anything, any parting words to, get folks a little bit more connected?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, firstly, don't be a stranger at all. Much like yourself, everyone is a friend, right? So reach out to me on LinkedIn, on X, I was going to say Twitter. Reach out to me. Don't be a stranger. I love to assist people with kind of nuanced questions, right? And I've done so for quite a long period of time. Everything from red teamers, blue teams, bug bounty people. Love to see the interest in the space. With respect to App Omni and App Omni research, go check out the blog, okay? On the appomni.com website, App Omni Labs is the security research function that I'm a part of and the founding member of. We've got tons of really, really cool research, more to come. Cannot say too much about that at the moment, more to come. But by the time this goes live, you never know, there might be something new there. So check that out 100%. And also, if you are an organization and this whole presentation, this whole discussion has got the gears and the cogs going, reach out to App Omni. If you're using SaaS applications, business critical stuff, reach out, see if we can help you with that.
Heck yeah. I love it. Thank you so much, Aaron. This has been awesome. Thank you. I'm super excited for the new research. I know I got a sprinkle teaser of what's to come, and it is incredible and quite a playground. So I'm ecstatic for you and the team, and I'm looking forward to see more and more incredible success. So thank you again and again, Aaron.
No problem at all. Absolute pleasure to be on. Thank you for having me.